The first light of dawn crept over the wild plains like a shy confession, brushing the horizon with pale gold as if afraid to startle the sleeping world. The night's cold still clung to the earth, turning every breath into a thin ghost drifting from Nayeli Dawn, age 20, who walked alone across the brittle dust. Her moccasins were frayed, her steps uneven, yet she moved with a stubborn grace, as though each stride carried the memory of a people who refused to bow to wind or hunger. She held a small satchel against her ribs, her fingers trembling not from chill but from the quiet fear that had followed her across half a desert. Ahead of her, a lone plume of smoke rose from a distant homestead, curling into the pale sky like a beckoning hand, and she wondered if this place, too, would turn her away like all the others, or if the land was finally guiding her toward something she did not yet dare to name. Only hours earlier, she had stood at the door of a ranch house where a man with bitter eyes slammed the wood shut before her sentence had even formed. "No shelter for your kind," he said, and the words struck deeper than the cold wind, deeper than the loneliness that had already hollowed her. She had felt her shame spread like dusk inside her chest, darkening her resolve for a single fragile heartbeat. The way he had stared at her, like she was danger, like she was a ghost in the wrong story, forced her to swallow a storm of words that had no safe place to land. She walked away with her hands shaking and her throat burning, each step heavier than the last. And yet she kept going, though she could not explain to herself why she still believed somewhere ahead there must be a door that stayed open. A strange curiosity pressed at her now. How many miles could a heart carry hope before hope cracked? Her knees faltered as she reached a slight rise in the land, and for a moment she thought exhaustion had taken her vision when she saw a tall figure emerging through the dust, a silhouette shaped by the early sun. Then the wind shifted, revealing the man clearly, and something inside her tightened. He moved with quiet steadiness, each step firm, as though the earth was accustomed to holding his weight. His hat shaded his face, but even from a distance she sensed the kind of loneliness that changes a man's walk over time. Nayeli paused, bracing herself, unsure whether to turn away or stand her ground. Asher Colt, age 30, slowed when he noticed her. He was a widower still carrying grief like a second shadow, the kind that never left even in daylight. His ranch behind him was humble. A weathered porch, a few horses grazing near the fence, and an unfinished rocking chair leaning against the cabin wall, half forgotten yet freshly sanded, as if he couldn't bear to complete a memory meant for someone who no longer breathed. The scent of pine drifted from the trees behind the cabin, and dust swirled around his boots in low spirals, as if the earth recognized him and rose to meet him. Asher rarely approached strangers, especially not lone travelers in the early dawn, yet something unspoken drew him forward now, a tug at his quiet instincts that he did not resist. He stopped a few feet from her, breath catching when he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the dried dust on her cheekbones, the faint tremble in her stance. "You look like you've walked farther than most let themselves," he said, his voice low and careful, as though soft was all he had left to give. Nayeli swallowed, hesitant, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one wants to give me shelter." She said it plainly, without bitterness, but the words carried a lifetime of rejection folded into a single breath. Asher studied her, conflicted. He had witnessed cruelty in the world, had been shaped by it, had lost love because fate had stolen more than it ever gave. Yet this woman before him looked like a storm trying hard not to break. When she stepped back, preparing to continue her lonely journey, something inside him lurched, the instinct of a man who had once loved deeply and knew the shape of sorrow when he saw it. "Wait," he called, the word escaping him faster than his thoughts. She froze. He steadied his breath. "You can rest here if you choose." Nayeli turned slowly, uncertain if she'd misheard. The last few towns had given her only closed doors and sharp eyes. She searched his face for mockery, but found none, only an unexpected kindness wrapped in a man who looked like he rarely allowed himself softness. Still, she hesitated before stepping onto the porch, half expecting him to change his mind. But he didn't. Instead, He brought her water in a tin cup, placing it on the porch rail so she wouldn't feel cornered. She drank slowly while he sat several feet away, giving her silence instead of questions. Dust drifted lazily through the beams of sunlight falling across them, and the porch creaked with every shift of the wind. Asher placed a small plate of bread near her boots, not directly into her hands, an unspoken gesture of respect. Nayeli's gratitude tightened her throat. She whispered thanks, her voice as fragile as spun glass. Part of her wondered why a man carrying grief would offer comfort to a stranger. Another part of her wondered if fate had finally let her reach the right door at last. When dusk fell, a fire crackled beside the cabin, throwing warm shadows that danced along the wooden walls like old spirits telling stories. Asher sat opposite her, the flames reflecting in his eyes. He spoke of his late wife with a quiet voice, never naming her sorrowfully but simply acknowledging the space she once filled. Nayeli listened, feeling the heaviness in his words, as though the fire itself bent closer to hear. She shared pieces of her own story, how her people had been scattered, how home had become a memory carried in her chest rather than a place she could return to. Her words trembled, but she didn't hide them. For once she felt heard, and the feeling startled her like a sudden gust of wind. Asher noticed her shivering and walked closer, offering his coat. She wrapped it around her shoulders with hesitant hands, feeling its warmth seep through her bones. She looked up at him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, her eyes reflecting firelight and the fragile uncertainty she'd carried for too long. Asher glanced away, searching for an answer he didn't yet understand. "Because someone should have," he murmured, though even he sensed there was something deeper pulling him toward her. Days passed, and her presence became a quiet rhythm in the ranch's silence. Nayeli helped soothe the horses, mended a broken fence, and gathered water from the creek. She moved with a grace that softened the land. Asher found himself watching her with an awareness he couldn't name, an appreciation born not of desperation but of gentle recognition. She crafted him a small feather charm, beaded with patient hands. When she tied it to the porch railing, the wind played through it softly, making it whisper like a blessing. Asher reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from her face one afternoon, and the moment lingered between them, suspended with a warmth neither tried to break. But the world beyond the ranch had not forgotten its bitterness. A group of settlers arrived one afternoon, their expressions stern. They warned Asher that keeping an Apache woman near would bring trouble. Their words struck Nayeli like cold rain. She stepped back, shame crawling up her spine. "I will leave," she whispered, her voice raw. "I don't want your life to be harmed because of me." Asher stepped in front of her, jaw tightening. "No," he said with a fierce quiet. "You're not walking out of here alone again." The settlers muttered threats as they departed, leaving a chill that settled over the land. Nayeli looked at Asher with heartbreak and gratitude tangled inside her gaze, wondering how long the world would allow her this fragile peace. A storm rolled in that night, wind thrashing against the cabin, lightning cracking across the sky like the world splitting open. Nayeli, shaken by the earlier confrontation, believed she had brought danger into his life. She slipped outside into the storm, tears indistinguishable from the rain. Asher saw her silhouette through the window, panic tightening his chest. He ran after her, catching her arm before the wind could steal her away. "Nayeli," he said breathlessly, rain streaming down his face, "don't do this." "I should not stay," she cried. "This home isn't meant for me." Asher cupped her face with trembling hands. "My home is waiting for you," he whispered fiercely. "Not because you need it, because I do." Her breath hitched, emotions pouring through her like the storm around them. The confession wasn't dramatic, wasn't loud. It was the quiet truth of a man who had stopped believing in beginnings until she arrived at his gate. "Then let the sun rise on a new name for me," she whispered, leaning into him as thunder rolled behind them. They married at dawn. The ceremony was small, woven from both of their worlds, Apache tradition braided with frontier vows. Asher tied a beaded cord gently around her wrist, Naeli placed a feather in his hair, fingers trembling with reverence. The sun spilled gold over them, the horses watching silently from the fence line as though witnessing something sacred. When Asher lifted the veil of feathers from her face, she smiled with a softness that felt like a promise written directly into the morning light. Life unfolded gently after that. They mended the ranch together, shared quiet laughter, and learned the pace of each other's hearts. Some townsfolk softened with time, others kept their distance, but Naeli's dignity stood unshaken now. Asher's loneliness faded like mist burned by the rising sun. Their days filled with shared work, shared meals, shared glances that spoke more than words ever could. And sometimes, when the wind swept across the plains, feathers danced through the air, catching sunlight as though blessing every corner of their land. Naeli would smile, leaning against Asher's shoulder, knowing that she had walked through a long desert of rejection just to find the one door that refused to close. If you find yourself wandering someday, through doubt, through loneliness, through the echo of too many doors shut in your face, remember this: shelter is not just a roof. Sometimes it is a heart brave enough to open. Sometimes it is a stranger who sees you clearly. And sometimes it is the quiet, unexpected place where your story finally rests and begins again.